Film Independent, and welcome to the 2024 Directors Close-Up. Before we start, I'd like to take a moment to thank all the partners that make Film Independent's important work possible. Thank you to this year's incredible supporters, the DCU, the DGA, the Directors Guild of America, SAG Indie, and IMDb Pro. And thank you also to our 2024 Film Independent Spirit Award supporters, premier sponsor Lavazza Coffee, principal sponsor IMDb Pro, and official partners Bullet Frontier Whiskey, Fiji Water, Petite Fleur Champagne, and Stella Artois. We so appreciate your support and devotion to the independent film community. Today we finish our online sessions with our annual Spirit of Independence roundtable featuring Spirit Award Best Director nominees and Directors of Best Feature nominees. So here with us today are Minhal Baig, writer-director of We Grown Now. Hey Minhal, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you for
having me. Where are you tuning in from?
I am tuning in from Chicago. Nice to be here. Thanks
for joining us. Minhal's other credits include Huller, and she's also written for BoJack Horseman and Rummy, amongst other things. So welcome, Minhal. Next up, Andrew Haig, writer-director of All of Us Strangers. Hey, Andrew.
Hello.
How you doing?
I'm very good, thank you.
Where are you joining us from?
I'm in London.
So thanks for staying up late for us.
My pleasure.
Andrew's other credits include Weekend, 45 Years, and one of my favorites, Lean on Pete. All of Us Strangers is also nominated for 6 BAFTAs this year, so congrats on those nominations, Andrew. Finally, William Oldroyd, director of Eileen. Hey, William.
Hello.
How are you?
Very well, thanks.
Where are you joining us from?
Rome.
Right. Wow. So staying up even later than Andrew.
Yes, on the St. Valentine's night.
I hope you haven't made some people angry there, like you're
no.
Joining us instead. Very much appreciate that. William's other credits include Lady Macbeth with Florence Pugh. Some of you may have know that. And our moderator today is my colleague, President of Film Independent, Josh Welch. Hey, Josh, how you doing?
Hello, Paul. I'm good.
Where are you joining us from?
I'm in lovely Glendale, California.
Beautiful downtown Glendale. Well, as always, I'm going to step off the virtual stage and tune in from back there. So take it away, Josh.
Great. Thank you, Paul. Well, William, Minhal, and Andrew, thank you so much for being here and participating in the Director's Close-Up this year. I just want to start by saying I love all 3 of your films so much. And if nothing else, you have brought me enormous joy this year watching your work and getting to really experience it and think about it a lot. And I'm excited for this conversation. As problematic or challenging as the movie industry might be right now, and we all know there's lots of problems with exhibition and financing, the quality of the work is so beautiful. I think 2023 was an incredible year for film, and your 3 films in particular really stand out as just gorgeous work. So thank you for being here. Today we're just going to dive in and talk really about conversationally about all the creative decisions that went into making your films and talk really about your processes in achieving this work. And for people watching, if you want to add questions, just put them in the Q&A button down at the bottom of your screen, and later in the conversation we'll get to those. But let's just kick things off at the beginning, just to kind of establish a baseline. I would love to hear from all 3 of you about the very starting point for these 3 films, and how long ago was it? When did you start working on this, or when were you inspired to make this particular film? And could you just talk a bit about what that development process was like for you? So we have 2 adaptations of books and 1 fully original screenplay. Minhal, maybe we'll start with you, since We Grown Now was not based on any previous material, but a script that you wrote. When did you start?
It just occurred to me it was in 2018 was the first time I had the thought to make the movie. Um, so I grew up in Chicago. I was born and raised there, which is where I am now. And there are these projects that existed in the city, public housing projects in the early, like they were built in the late 30s, early 40s, for war veterans, and then predominantly housed African Americans, and that came to Chicago because of the Great Migration. This is a history that I was always familiar with, but I didn't really deeply understand it because while I was growing up, all the high rises in the city were being demolished. It was part of a plan for transformation that started in the year 2000. So it it feels like it's a whole, there was all these things that were pointing me in this direction of making this movie, but the first one was really this photograph that was taken on the playground of one of these high rises, and it featured a girl on this swing set, and I that place doesn't exist anymore. But I was just so struck by it, and I felt like there's a world here that is not really depicted in in film and television in the way that sort of centers the perspective of the residents, of what it's like to actually live there. And so I started my research in 2018, and then it required going back and forth. I was traveling a lot, coming back here to talk to former residents, so people who lived in the high rises. And then that took many years. So it was very journalistic at first. And at some point, I had even considered it was going to be a documentary, and then it shifted into a narrative. Like I really felt like I don't know that I can do a documentary without the place itself. But I can make a movie and we can build it. Of course, at the time, I didn't realize making a period film set in a time and place that doesn't exist anymore with children was going to be as difficult as it would be. But yeah, it was 2018, and then we got sort of traction in 2020, and then COVID happened, so we had to wait to shoot. So that's where the inspiration comes from. But a lot of the stories that, pieces of them ended up being in the film were from the interviews that I did with residents who lived in the buildings.
So was it in place pretty much from the beginning that you would be telling the story through the eyes of these boys, where it was focused on the children?
It wasn't until I started speaking to people who were kids in the early 90s, and the former residents who had been children. And it was when they spoke of the place, they spoke about it very differently than people who were already adults. They spoke about it in a very nostalgic way. So then I felt that that's the perspective I haven't seen before, and it really challenges the dominant cultural narrative of the public housing projects. Because what our understanding of them is that it was a place full of drugs, crime, and activity and all that. And the reality was very different for people who actually lived there, and especially for children who saw it. This was like the only place they've ever known as home. So it was very different through their eyes, and I was interested in exploring that. What does it look like and feel like when you're a kid living in one of these high-rise buildings?
Beautiful. Thank you. William, I'd love to hear from you as well on this. When did you first read Otesha Mosfeg's novel, and did it strike you right away you wanted to do this as a film, or how did the idea come to you?
Yeah, right away. It was the first lockdown, which must have been March 2020, when had some time on my hands and decided to do some reading. And actually, the first book I read was My Year of Rest and Relaxation, which seemed like a good book at the time because it was about a young woman who puts herself to sleep for a year, which felt like it could be a useful manual going into the next few months of lockdown. And then I loved that book, and I just decided to read as many of Otesha's books as I could find. And the one that struck me most was Eileen. And so again, I think also Tessa had some time on her hands, so we arranged to have a Zoom and just we had a general chat about her great books. And then I said, well, what are you doing with Eileen? Would you want to make it into a film? I think this main character is fantastic, fascinating. I haven't read anyone quite like her for a while. And she said, yeah, I would be interested in doing that. So we started. I mean, there were a few things she had to sort of clear first in terms of making sure that she could do that, legally and so on and what have you, with all the rights and what have you. But she had wanted to adapt it, and she adapted it with her husband Luke, her writing partner. And it was a really beautiful time, because we had these many months where no one was really able to shoot anything. Obviously, we just communicated over Zoom, and she would write part of the script and then send it to me, and I'd have a look and then send it back with some thoughts, and then they'd keep writing. And by September, we had a sort of first draft, which we could then use to go out to producers and say, who wants to come on board? And it was quite an interesting way of going about it, because it meant that Tessa was able to put on the page the character of Eileen that she saw.
Mm-hmm.
It was really sort of without anything other than there was no other external pressure for her to write. She just wrote the character, and then really we were in a situation where we could invite people to come and take part in this project based on what we had already done. So it would only get better. So people would have to sort of agree in the first instance that they wanted to come on board a project set up like this. That the script was going to be tonally in this sort of space, and we were thinking about how to break it down in this way and so on. So we then found the perfect partners that way.
So in that writing process with her, I'm curious, were there ways that she wanted to transform the novel a little bit and change things for the film, or were there things that you wanted to have her consider changing to, bring it into a different space?
Both. I mean, what's great about it is that I think the film of it came off the page quite easily. I mean, I feel like it's written quite like a film anyway. The images are very cinematic, and so it just, I remember sitting outside with the book and just sort of having read it, closing my eyes and just imagining it. You're just imagining the pictures, how it would unfold, and then jotting it down, and then feeding it back to Tessa and Luke, and then seeing whether they were roughly in agreement. I think anything that they wanted to do, they did. I mean, I don't think there was anything that was sort of forbidden in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
It felt very free, very sort of free process. And also anything that Tessa and Luke wanted to add, I was not against, because ultimately Tessa had created this character in the first place. So I couldn't sort of say to her, well, that's not really what Eileen would say, because she was like, well, I actually invented her. So it was a very nice way of working, even though we were miles apart. It actually felt like we it happened quite quickly, I guess, because there wasn't a lot else going on.
Right. And was this her first screenplay?
No, she had written Causeway, I think, with Luke.
Okay.
I think that's right. And yeah, I think I didn't know any other. And she's also, adapting her other novels as well. So I mean, she's in the process of doing that.
Yeah.
But yes, I mean, I'm sorry it's not more sort of exciting.
No, that's great. Thank you. Thank you. It's so interesting the different ways these films came about and the different original inspirations and source material. Andrew.
Can I just say one thing else to
sure.
add? I think I found it because I wasn't looking for it as well. That's one important thing, that I had been reading a lot to try and adapt. And when the lockdown happened, I just threw everything away and thought, right, but then actually everything stopped, we can relax. So I went outside thinking, I'm never going to make this into a movie, and read it for fun. And I think the process of reading it for fun actually was like, oh, but I think that was a big shift for me, which actually I was enjoying reading during those months of quarantine.
That's great. That's wonderful. Andrew, I mean, the same question for you. So All of Us Strangers is, would you say, loosely based on the Japanese novel Strangers? What spoke to you in that book where you thought, I can turn this with a lot of transformation into the film All of Us Strangers?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely loosely based, but I got sent it. It is probably about 2018 as well. It's a long time ago when I got it, and it is, if anyone's read it, it's a very traditional Japanese ghost story, much more of a almost horror film kind of vibe to it. About a straight relationship, the romantic relationship is a straight relationship. But I read the novel and I was like, there's something interesting about it, and it was this idea of going back and being able to meet your parents again, which is definitely what is the concept of the novel too. But when I first read it, I sort of figured I wouldn't be able to do it and I wouldn't be able to find my way into that. So I actually put it aside, even though I didn't tell the producers that who had sent it to me. I said, I'm just going to keep thinking about it for a bit longer. But then actually, when COVID happened, I was in LA. And so I was away from lots of people at home. And that's when I started sort of really thinking about it again and writing the first draft of it. And suddenly it all started to make a lot more sense. And then for me, it's always, I have to be able to feel really personally connected to a piece of material, even if it feels like it's nothing to do with me. I have to somehow be able to understand my way into it, that it really does make sense that I'm the only person that can make this version of this story. You get sent a lot of, and you're like, well, lots of people could do that and do it better than me and do a more interesting version of that than me. But why do I need to tell this story? And then slowly it kind of built from there. And I started realizing how I can make it so much more personal. And so it could feel so much more related to my life and my upbringing and all that kind of thing, and my relationship with my parents. And so it took quite a long time. But when I'm kind of a strange one, because when I write, I sort of want to pretend almost that the film is never going to get made and that actually no one's going to want to make it, because I end up feeling a lot more freer when I do that. Because when you've got like that tension of like, oh, fuck, I'm actually going to have to make this film after I've written it. It's like, so then I'm actually going to have to do the next stage of it and have to go out and pitch it. And I hate all that kind of stuff. That's awful. So I sort of try and ignore it. Don't tell the producers that. I say, yeah, I'm definitely really want to do it. But so then I don't really decide that it is the film I want to do until usually I'm like 2 or 3 drafts into it. And that's when I'm like, no, this is it now. I really am ready to make this and I want to make this. And it did take about 3 drafts until I sort of, worked out exactly how I wanted it to feel. And that was essentially through the 2 years of COVID, I think, especially, essentially.
Sorry to can I ask a question? Was that the feedback? You got notes from a producer, from an outside body telling you, suggesting things in those?
Yeah, so it was like Blueprint, who produced it, Graham Broadbent and Sarah Harvey, but they're the producers. And at that time, it was only them and Film 4. They were developing it from the beginning with me. So you were getting notes from Film 4 and from them. And actually, they were all very, I think we all know that notes can be challenging a lot of the time when you're getting notes from people, but they were actually good notes. And it was almost like just keep going was essentially their note, which is the best note I think you can get. Is like, just keep at it. You're on the right track. Just follow that. And this doesn't quite work. And I think it doesn't quite work. And often when something's not working. And so I was actually quite lucky to have that space, because I could work through myself about what was working and what wasn't working.
But the bare bones of the movie we saw was there at the beginning, or it came by 2 or 3, or where?
I think the bare bones is definitely there, but definitely each draft you're getting to some deeper level of what you're trying to express and how you're trying to express it, and every scene with dialogue is getting better and better and better, and feeling like it's more associated with the thing that you're trying to say. But I think from the very beginning until the end, there was a lot more genre, I would say, in the early draft. In the very first draft was a lot more genre heavy, because I think essentially the reason that they wanted to make the film was because they thought I was going to make a traditional, like, scary ghost story. And then draft by draft, I kind of like stripped all of that
No,
out.
it's a love story. No, oh my God.
Like, where's the scary bits and why is it
What a
gay?
con artist.
It's like you've made it too gay. What are you doing? But they were actually very supportive. They could see where it was going, so it was fine. But I definitely,
Imagine getting that note. Imagine getting the note, too gay. Can you
you
imagine?
kind of just get that note.
Could you cut back on this a little bit, please?
You just say it in a certain way that isn't, it's too gay. It's like, how's this going to work for like a general audience, do you think?
Oh,
It's
yeah.
that like, I don't say
Oh,
tone
wow.
down the game.
It's,
Andrew, I was really because I reread the screenplay recently because I do that. I like will watch the movie, then read the screenplay, and then watch the movie again. I'm very struck by how efficient you are. You get in and out. It's just very to the essence. Those scenes are so like exactly the length they need to be, even on the page. And I'm curious, do you like in your first drafts, are you like an overwriter and do you like kind of pare it down, or how or are you always sort of writing very concisely?
No, totally overwriting to start with. Like the scenes go on forever, and I know they're way too long to start with. They're like, oh my God. I mean, no one's going to be interested how long this scene is. So it is, they start very, very long. And then I usually like hone it back to too short. And then you try and like find whatever that rhythm is. Do you know what I mean? And sometimes you need a scene to be longer in the middle of the film because for whatever reason, when it's all together, I can sort of then work it out. But it is always changing. Like I'm rewriting usually like 2 days before I'm shooting, and realizing, the actors now can do this with a look rather than me having to have 5 lines to describe what they're supposed to be feeling. So it does it. Yeah, it varies, but yeah.
Andrew, I have one more follow-up question on the writing process for All of Us Strangers, which is, I mean, it's an incredible feat that you pull off in terms of moving back and forward in time between the living and the dead, memory, fantasy. There's so much going on. I mean, one thing I love about the film is I never felt confused or lost, but I often, especially in the first half, really did not know. It was like I was leaning in because I was engaged completely by the film, while at the same time not knowing what was happening on some level. So I wanted to be with it and experience that. But I'm curious, and the other piece of that is it's emotionally devastating. I mean, a lot of people have talked about this, but I mean, just for myself, like I was just weeping throughout big chunks of this movie where it was unexpected. Like I'm sitting there leaning, I'm like, is he alive? What's happening? And then suddenly I'm crying. And so, but going back to you as the writer, I'm curious, and I don't, this will make it sound like I'm imagining you as this emotionally manipulative creator. I don't mean that, but were you aware of the moments where you really wanted something to land emotionally and you had a clear sense, this is where I'm going to reveal something that's going to really, land really powerfully emotionally? Or were you surprised in that when further along in the process, when you're actually had stuff filmed and seeing how people reacted then?
Yeah, it's interesting. I knew that it was I knew that I wanted the film. The film is, obviously it's not realism in any stretch of the imagination. So I knew I wanted to sort of like allow the audience to get lost in the film, but still be engaged and understand where it's going and want to be with it. So that made sense to me, and I wanted it to work on a essentially purely emotional level. If it is all let's say it's a manifestation of his feeling or his longing or his desire, that it had to work on a purely emotional level. And I knew when I was writing it that it was affecting me. Like I got upset writing scenes, and I don't normally, and I could feel like it was, I'd be sitting there listening to songs that end up being in the film, and I'm writing the scenes, and I'm like weeping in my chair as I'm like writing it. So I knew that it was emotionally affecting me, but I didn't know that necessarily that was going to work for other people. And even then, once we shot it, this is kind of going forward, but even in the edit, to start with, I'm like, oh yeah, it definitely is affecting me. But then you lose that the
Yeah.
more you work. And it's the same when you're writing it. You're like, I don't know, it doesn't affect me anymore because I know what the words are and I know what I've shot, and you know that where the light was, and you know all those things. So that became the trickiest thing for me, was like, how do I think what the audience is going to feel at this point? Because I don't feel it anymore. I've lost it. It's not doing anything. So it was a nice surprise later on down the line when people are like, oh yeah, it does still emotionally work.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it definitely does. It's quite incredible. So I know we talked a little bit before this panel started of the questions that you get asked endlessly about casting. So I'll try and steer away from those a little bit, but I can't ignore it, because I mean, all three of your films have such astonishing casts, and so much of your films, it's about the face of your leads, where you're just, I mean, I could just, with Andrew Scott, I mean, it's like you just want to stay on his face. And Minhal, I mean, with your two leads, Malik and Eric, why don't we start with you? What were you looking for when you started the casting process? I mean, you must have been looking for you have a good sized cast. There's a lot of parts to cast, but in those two boys, let's maybe start there. What were you looking for? And were you working with a casting director who specializes or really is good at discovery and working with like new actors, kids? How did you approach that?
There's a very this is very full circle, but the director's close-up that I attended that had the first one I went to, there was a casting director there, Aisha Kohli, and she ended up working on our film.
Oh, beautiful.
She had cast this film called Crooklyn that Spike Lee directed with these kids and just growing up. And Zelda, playing the lead, she is so special in that movie. I watched and I said, I want kids like this that just feel they don't feel too polished. They are still children. They're not too precocious. You know, they're not too, like, I wanted them to really feel like children. And it was hard to cast because, you know, because of COVID restrictions, I was doing I was getting self-tapes over Zoom, which is already weird. You know, it's a strange process to do that with adult actors, but it's also it's even more strange to do it with children, especially if they don't have any previous experience. So we had all these tapes. We were looking for over a year and a half. And we even had some options that, you know, of kids who just aged out by the time we shot the movie. So we just kind of kept looking and looking. And it felt like, I don't know, I was really at a place of I can't make this movie unless I find these two children. They have to be very specific. Malik had to be you know, an extroverted, charismatic kid who just naturally felt like a leader. And then Eric had to be, you know, very emotional, but also stoic and reserved at the same time. And we found them. We found we found Blake in Alabama, and he sent in his tape, and we were just like very floored by it. And he felt like a real kid. And so we found him, and then we found Gian. He's actually lives in the neighborhood I live in now. He's from Chicago, and he just felt like he was, you know, he felt like he could very much well have lived, like you could pick him out from like the street almost, like. And so we got those two tapes, and then we did Zoom chemistry reads with the two kids, which was again very strange. And I had to read a lot about how to work with children, and how that process can be a little bit different than working with adults, because they're so young, they internalize a lot of what is in the story unless we find a way to separate their character from who they are as people. So then we also had in-person rehearsals. It was a very long process to find these kids. I didn't know that going into it, but I'm like Andrew, like I was writing the script, like expecting no one to make this movie. There's no one who would finance this film. So I just wrote the thing that was going to be almost impossible to make. Like it's set in a public housing project that doesn't exist anymore. It's two kids, two 10-year-old boys that are leading the movie. And it's set in the 90s. So it was like almost like no, I gave everyone reasons to say no to the movie, but in a way it was freeing because I could just write the movie the way I envisioned it in my head. The hardest part was writing the kids and then finding the kids and then going and rewriting once I'd found them, because I realized their personalities were also shaping the characters too. And so for the most part,
did you improvise as well? Did the children improvise as well?
there's a few scenes where they improvised. For the most part, they were saying their lines. There's like a few times where I gave them the option of like, they're like, but Malik would say this, and I was like, okay, go ahead, like try it. And sometimes it would work and sometimes it wouldn't, and I would just let them do it. And then I would tell the script supervisor, that's not, we're not doing that. But I gave them chances to, because I think sometimes it did work. There were a few lines in the movie that are very special that they came up with as their characters, that we would work in rehearsal, and sometimes they would say like, well, what if he said this? And I would say, why? And he's like, well, because this, and that. And they were always thinking about their characters, actually, which was really kind of surprising. They weren't saying it like I would say that. They would say like my character would say that.
But if they ever got blocked on something, how did you free them up? Was there anything you could do to free them up a bit?
There was when one of them would come to set and he had maybe not slept very well or had too much sugar, and he was in one place the whole time. So he would give the delivery, but he couldn't change it very much. So I had them do this rehearsal. There's this, I have this thing that I would have them do, which is really try and put on the code of the character at the beginning of the scene. So they would say like, now you're going from being Gian to Eric. You are now Eric now. We would do the scene. Then the scene ends and now you are back to being Gian, because I really wanted them to get in the mindset of thinking about what would my character do. So I would really try to remind them like, where are you right now? What are you doing? What happened right before? Sometimes that would work. Other times I would have them like get out of their minds a bit, and it would mean like having them do something very physical. Like just run down this breezeway, hold on to the fence, and now just yell. And don't worry about the dialogue, but just do something to get outside of your body, because they would get occasionally very blocked, between setups and stuff. They'd be like, get bored, and then I have to re-engage them.
Yeah.
So there were some times where it was quite challenging, but I had a lot of support because I got to know them really well as people, and so what motivated them, because they were motivated very differently, and how to talk to them too, because one of them really liked more of the psychology of the character, and the other one was just like, I had to really help him physically feel like he was in the scene.
Had they acted before in film at all, or was this their first experience?
This was both of their first lead roles. One of them had been in a music video and he just had to cry. That was it. And then the other child, he had done something very small. But neither of them had significant dialogue. Like the one that had been in the music video had never done dialogue. But they took to it. They like I didn't give them the whole script. I gave them like scenes in the rehearsal process, and then they would treat it like a real assignment. Like they would bring their scenes in and they would read it and we would work on it. And they took to it really seriously.
Fantastic.
When you cast, I always think there's a question I always worry about when you cast someone, and in retrospect, you're like, I knew they were the right people, right? And you cast them. How long did it take for you to actually know that they were the right people? Do you know what I mean? Because I always think it takes a bit of time when you're shooting to be like, oh yeah, my decisions were right. Or did you know straight away after you cast them, you were like, yeah, these are the guys?
I had a really good feeling in the Zoom, the chemistry reads, but in the studio I had to sign off on them once they had done that. But it wasn't until the first day of shooting, which I think sounds terrifying to a financier or a studio, that I didn't fully know for sure. But there's a scene where they're running to the Art Institute in Chicago, and it just took off. That shot to me just felt like these are the right kids. And then that first day of shooting where we were on the train, a moving train, that was the first day they ever did any real dialogue. And it was really just the two of them. it felt like, oh, the movie is here. Like now I suddenly felt a relief that even if everything else went terrible, like production wise, that the two kids I cast were the right kids.
Yeah, that first day is so terrifying. When you're on there and you're like, is any of this going to work? And the actors, you know, speaking for the first time and they're doing their accents and they're with each other and you're like, I think it works. Yes, it's good. I think it's good. So that day is just terrifying, I think.
I
Terrifying.
had so much anxiety, and then they pulled it off, and I felt like the rest of the film it will be easier, I think. It was not, in fact, logistically easier, but I felt with these two that it will only get better, their relationship working with them. So that was such a relief.
Did you bear that in mind when you scheduled which order to shoot the scenes in? Did you think, you know,
Yeah, it was a very similar, it was like the scenes with them, we started out with scenes with them and just the two of them. And then we had more of the adult actors in the middle. And then we went back to being small with just the two of them. And it felt really right. It kind of covered the nature of their relationship. By the end of the movie, we were getting closer to the end of shooting. The end of shooting kind of coincided with the end of film, like what the movie happens in
they
the film.
became more comfortable with each other the more time they spent together, and so
Yeah, they got to know each other quite well. And they were very competitive with each other too, which comes out in the movie. Off-screen drama, you know, helps with the film. I didn't instigate it, but I think it was useful for the film.
In Lady Macbeth, we had a kid, and he was a twin. Because the hours are so limited, when his time ran out, we just swapped him out for his brother. Because it was just, otherwise we couldn't shoot the movie in the time we had. I mean, it was impossible.
If only you could, all actors, if all actors had a twin that you could just replace every now
I know, you got tired, skip them out.
I think someone's trying to do that, aren't they? With AI.
Yes, AI twins.
That was actually one of the challenges, the greatest logistical challenges of the movie was the hours with the children. I
bet.
I think everyone underestimated how hard that would be, because it's like starts from the moment they leave to get to set, and then they had to their shooting time was so limited, especially during school hours. And I think now that I know that, I have so much more reservation writing anything with children in it ever again.
Did you have to school them as well?
Yeah, they had school and they love school. It was great, but it was also like for us, there's only a few scenes in the movie. There's actually only one scene in the movie without a kid in it. So it was just, there was nowhere to hide. It was always them in every scene. So we had to make do with their really 4.5 hours in the beginning. And then it got better.
So your shooting is basically like cut in half because of the children's hours.
Yeah, I think we had about we had 29 shooting days, but then I did the math of how much of that was actually filmed with the kids, and it came out more closer to like 17 days with the kids. We did a lot of like other work outside of it and preparing so that when they came to set that we were ready to film, but the actual shooting time, like I did all the division, and it was like it's really like 16, 17 days.
William, I wanted to ask you on the casting front, one thing we haven't talked about with your film is just the, you know, the kind of the noir element to it and the genre element. Did that noir tone and aesthetic shape your approach to casting? Or were you thinking about that, you know, actors who could thrive in that milieu or that noir world?
Well, I think Thomas
great actors.
I think Thomas one of the great actors, basically, and I think, you know, my feeling about casting is, you know, if you have a great script, you can get great actors. It seems to be that way round. I've found that great actors respond to great scripts, and we had that. Otessa and Luke had written great scripts, so we were, you know, off to a great start. And I think in the book, probably Eileen is a little more, a little harder, a little more spiky than, she's quite hard and spiky in the book, but actually what Thomasin presented when I met her several times and she taped for us and we talked about it, and so it was really a character who I could sympathize with. You know, I really felt very close to her, and I felt that I could see her in that world. I felt she had a life. You know, I really believed her in that place, and it meant that that vulnerability that Thomasin has already was essential for creating this character. I think if she'd just been this sort of this tough person with a sort of hard outer shell, it would have been very difficult to sort of actually penetrate her mind and to think and see through her eyes and so on. But I was lucky because Tessa and Luke were there, as were the producers, you know, Anthony, Steph, and Peter, and Film 4 again. But they were all part of the casting process. I think there's this sort of idea that directors just cast who they want, but it's absolutely. I mean, we're lucky in that we can cast more or less who we want, but I mean, there are definitely movies where you're told these are the actors who are going to get this thing over the line and live with it. And I mean, luckily, we're not in that situation. We are working with actors who we are really happy to. We're delighted to they make the film, you know.
Yeah.
You know, I'd love to take credit for casting everyone in the movie. I mean, I can say that the people in the movie are the people I wanted, but it was part of a much larger conversation. You know, it was Jeannie McCarthy, the casting director, is fantastic. You know, she had all these great ideas, and especially as a Brit who doesn't really know many American actors, but the interesting faces, the people who are going to populate this small town outside Boston. You know, I really rely on those casting directors to sort of introduce you to those people. I knew I wanted Thomasin, I knew I wanted Annie for Rebecca, and I knew I wanted Shea Wiggum for Dad. And then really, for me, the sort of great discovery, I mean, not that she is a discovery, she's been working for many, many years, but to me was Marina Hyland, who played Mrs. Pollock. I just thought she was sensational. And, you know, what she does in the film is really pretty much what she taped for us in her own basement in New York. She taped it self-tape, yeah. And so what you see in the movie is pretty much what she did on the tape. But she was just terrific, really, really great. So
it's funny, isn't it? It's like the casting of a film. I mean, this what I did was a bit different. There's only 4 people, but normally it's those smaller roles. If you get them wrong, the film is a nightmare. And that's when you really got to count on a good casting director, because you can't get big, often you can't get big famous people to play tiny roles, but they've got to feel like those people are completely real and brilliant. Otherwise the scenes don't work and you end up cutting things out. So that is, to me, is always the sign of really good casting, is like every single person, even the person with one line, is brilliant. And you're like, yeah,
maybe you should write them many, many more scenes.
Yeah.
And then just cut them all.
Cut them out, yeah.
In the speaks that you want.
You have Kate Blanchett as like a postwoman, just with one line, you know, that you.
Well,
there's another 25 minutes of incredible scenes.
I was actually going to say, William, in Lady Macbeth, Naomi Ackie's character was like that for me. I think that was incredible casting. She really just stood out even in that role. Like, I just felt like there was something about, you cast somebody who was just exactly right.
I mean, what was great about this, actually, the casting of Shaheen Baig, another Baig, but she's really a fantastic casting director. And she said she was the reason I think she took the job when I went to Lady Macbeth was because she knew we could cast whoever we want, because the money was so little. I mean, it was $350,000 to make the film, and so she knew she wouldn't be told by a studio, you have to have this person in the film. So she actually had carte blanche to sort of to present all these great young actors that she knew. You know, so Naomi was somebody that she had seen for a long time and, you know, wanted to give an opportunity to in this film. And so when we met her, it was perfect. I mean, it was, you know, she said, you know, we're lucky, we can have whoever we want. And that's not always the case, you know, and as you keep going, you realize that is really not the case. I mean, sometimes you are being told, yeah, nice idea, but we need this, you know, you need to find somebody like this. So
Yeah.
she's great. I mean, I think I really rely on those people to they have such a great eye because I think also sometimes you don't have the luxury of any rehearsals. So when they turn up on the day, as you were saying with these kids on the day, like if it doesn't work, you're really in trouble. But so you can, for the small parts, end up just typecasting because you know that if they do it, you've seen them do it on the tape, they can do exactly that thing you've seen on the day. So you have one less thing to worry about, rather than finding someone who might be a bit better but have it in their range, but it's a bigger risk for you. You know, I find that sort of thing is, you know, I've got so many friends who are actors who are like, God, I'm always cast as the same thing on TV or films. Like, yeah, because the directors are too anxious that you may turn up and not be able to do it. But because they've seen you do this 15 times before on TV, they're going to get you in to play the cop because you can really do the cop super well. Do you know? It's this is a criticism of directors not being imaginative enough or not having enough time.
Yeah.
Or courage, I guess, that you're speaking to is like
Courage.
a bit of courage to cast someone who may not have done something before.
Exactly.
Exactly. And Andrew, in your film Weekend, it was like that too. It was just discovering new people for the first time. And I was I'm also saying that as an American, like these people may have had more prominence. I did not know who they were. So I was really taken by that film, especially because it really is just two people. And I also curious in that film, was it the scenario where you could just cast anyone in the movie?
Yeah, we made that film. I mean, we shot the film for £65,000, and then in total it was like 100,000, I think. So what the total budget was after at the very end. So we had no money, and as William says, when you've got no money, it's like no one cares. It's like we're not going to get. It's not going to be Brad Pitt isn't going to star in your 65 grand film. So you have all the choice you want actually, and you know, casting director I worked with a lot, Colleen Crawford. You know, we met loads and loads and loads and loads of people. In fact, that's the only time I think on a film that I've actually done endless auditions. Like since then, I sort of haven't. But I kind of missed that a little bit when you know you can go whoever you want and they're just unknowns is exactly who you're looking for. It was exciting. But as you say, as William says, it gets different when the minute your film goes up the budget level, you have to have somebody that is a name, and all you can hope is that that name is also someone you want, like, and then it's fine. But you can't have a bunch of unknowns in a film, you know, that's $8 million or whatever it is.
Andrew, one person who was really a revelation to me in All of Us Strangers, and he's obviously he's a very accomplished, well-known actor in a big role in it, but still it was just a revelation, was Jamie Bell as the father. Like I'd never seen him like that. And he was, oh my God. I mean, it was just so powerful and moving. And you just sense the genuine history between the three of them in that family. You know, to see him doing that, I was just like, who is Jamie Bell? Like he's, you know, it's just like a completely new person.
Yeah, I love him in the film, and I've always I've wanted to work with Jamie for quite a long time, and I've never quite worked out what that role was. That makes sense. I've always really loved him, from Billy Elliot onwards, and he's often made really interesting choices. He's worked with interesting directors, and he's done interesting stuff. And for me, it's always like when you sit down with an actor, like I don't audition them or anything, but you sit down with them, you just ask, I want to know like why they want to do the film and what it means to them and why it speaks to them. And the minute I met Jamie and we're talking about it, I just knew he wanted to bring so much of himself to that role as a dad and as a son and all of those things that, you know, he deals with in his own life. He was so excited about bringing that to the role. And so I just you hope he was the right person. And I think he's fantastic in the film.
Yeah.
And I always think it's really nice. I love the idea of like, you take someone that you can't imagine doing something like this, and then you put them in that role, and it's just really exciting to watch. It's like, you know, it's like Anne Hathaway in your film, in William's film. It's like, oh, this is not what I thought she would be doing. And that's so exciting as a viewer, because you're like, oh yeah, that's a bit unexpected, but somehow it all makes sense as well. It's that you want to be surprising the audience, but at the same time, they're like, oh yeah, that makes sense that that person is doing this role.
So another question I want to ask all three of you, and it's very broad, but one thing that struck me with all three of your films is they're gorgeous. I mean, they are beautiful to look at. They're cinematically, the richness of imagery, the color palette, in very different ways. They're just beautiful visual artwork. But so I'd love to hear you, the three of you, talk about your approach to working with your cinematographer and your production designer. I mean, that's obviously a huge topic, and there's a lot to cover. But, and Minho, maybe starting with you again. I mean, like, there's these powerful images that just pop. You keep coming back to the curtains in the window, and the other memory that just stays with me from the film are you do these at different points in the film extreme close-ups of the boys' faces, and especially Malik, which it's just beautiful. And I mean, not just his face, but the way you frame it and the lighting and everything. And I'd love to hear you talk about, I don't know, maybe I'm exaggerating the use of beauty here, but like, if you could, it's also in your film, I think the viewer might not expect beauty when you're talking about, if someone tells me, oh, you're going to watch a film about Cabrini Green and the, you know, before it's torn down, and it's like, what you present is not what I would necessarily expect.
Yeah, I think that was that art. We did have a goal of presenting it in a very different light, because the actual architecture of those buildings is very depressing. It's concrete. It's, you know, the colors are very gray, can be very bleak. There's documentaries about Cabrini Green, and it looks very dire. You know, it's not a, it's definitely it was a tough neighborhood to grow up in for a lot of these kids. So I mean, that was, on one hand, I'm holding that truth, and then there's the other truth of that this place was home for people, and that this community in the high rises were very tight knit and warm, and those places did feel like home to them. So I really wanted to represent that, and that was something that I felt I needed to get a cinematographer on board with, because reading the script, one might think that I want some kind of gritty realism, and I said no. I do not want a kitchen sink gritty realism, because I want the audience to feel invested in this place like the kids are. I want us to see it the way they see it, and it still has a lot of potential to them, because their best friends all live in the same building. It's kind of an amazing experience growing up. So I wanted that to be reflected. And when Pat Scola came on board, he shot this film called Pig for Mike Sarnowski, and I was really blown away by the beauty in that movie. It's very different than our film, because they shot largely in like locations and exteriors. So it was very different than our movie, but it had a very special quality that was so driven by the storytelling and the characters. And in a way, I was like, I want someone who really is drawn to the story and who understands like what we're going for, and the visual language really has to be a reflection of these characters experiencing this world, these two kids. And he and I developed that language. We also spoke about films that had a visual language that we loved, that had like nothing to do with the subject matter of our movie, but felt big and grand. We needed a film that was like, this is set in a project, it's about these two kids, but we don't want to ever make it feel too domestic or too intimate, you know, for cinema, you know. So we talked about Paulo Sorrentino a lot. I'd watched Hand of God, and I just thought there's nothing this man can't do. Like, everything is just so big and expansive and expressive, and I wanted a little bit of that in our movie, even in our own way. And that's what he brought to it. And the production designer, we had to build the actual apartment unit, because they don't exist anymore. So we found an actual layout, like a blueprint of it, and we recreated it. It's a little bit larger than what it was historically, but we lit it in a way that felt warm and like a place you wanted to return to, and the place that you could feel lost for. when you leave. So that guided a lot of our decision making. Like, we really wanted to feel like this is from the perspective of these kids, and that guided quite a lot of our decisions, and just from lighting, composition, and you know, even the shots where we stay on their faces and we're not kind of zooming out, it's because sometimes that was enough to convey what was necessary. And I found that increasingly through the shooting of the movie, that it was enough to stay on them. And sometimes I was trying to do something fancier and I realized, like, I don't need that. And that was it was again a relief, because I was trying to, you know, make it, just reduce it to its most essential parts. We had to do that logistically because of the kids' time, you know, how much time we have with them, but also I think it made the scenes better and reminded us, like, this is what's most important, is how they experience it.
Did you use one camera or did you use two cameras?
We used one camera for pretty much the entire shoot, and there was a second camera we used not to shoot a scene at the same time. Like, we didn't have two cameras running and a dialogue scene or anything. It was, we had one camera with the kids on one floor, we were doing something, and then we would run up and there was another camera that was shooting a totally different shot. So that we didn't ever have really two cameras at the same time. Though I think I'm just not a two camera person. I don't know how to focus on two images at the same time. I don't know if that's like what it's like for you all, but I have a hard time. Like, I feel like I'm missing something if I'm focusing on two frames at the same time.
Mhm.
Like that, I get confused. Yeah, I feel like I'm missing something if I do that. Freaks me out. But it's so interesting what you say, because it's really true that you've got to be so careful when you're making a film, that you also listen to what the film is giving you as you're making it and what the actors are giving you. You can be so dogmatic about, I need the film to look like this, or I need a scene to look like this. But sometimes you should and do change your mind, and you realize what the actors are giving you and how that can change. It's why I love shooting in order as much as I can, because you shoot in order and then the film gives you something else as you're making it, and you realize, oh no, this is where the film needs to go. This is how I need to visually kind of change the way I'm shooting things.
Andrew, I'd love to hear you talk about in All of Us Strangers, the working with the cinematographer. I feel like it's so essential. I mean, obviously your actors are critical, but the way the camera moves and what's in frame and the way you transition from one physical space to another is really essential to the narrative of the story and where we are in time and memory. And how did you just work through that?
It's just a lot, you know, it's so hard now. I can barely remember. You have all these, it's hours and hours of conversations. You know, I hadn't worked with Jamie Ramsey, the DP, before, but we'd had I liked his work, and I had a really good conversation with him. And he, again, like the actors, he really seemed to understood what we were trying to do. And from our very conversations, it was just like, we want every frame to feel like it is a manifestation of how he is feeling. Simple as that. So how do you visually show loneliness? How do you visually show intimacy? How do you visually show love or pain or whatever that might be? And then how can the camera reflect that emotion, like almost in a phenomenological way type thing? So we had lots and lots of conversation about what that means. What does it feel like to be alone in your apartment? How does visually it feel? What do you hear? What does it sound like? You know, what is in focus? What's not in focus? All of those things. And then slowly we just sort of built up an idea of how we wanted the film to feel. And those transitions were very important. And we talked a lot about how I didn't want it to feel like two separate things. So I didn't want the London bit to feel so different from the past, if you want to call it that, or whatever that is, or the ghost element with the parents. I wanted to feel like it was all entwined with each other, like memory is, and like grief is, and like pain is. It feels so present. It doesn't feel like it's in the past. It feels like it's there in your present. So we wanted that to feel there was a continuity, and even as the film developed, that sort of got closer and closer together visually. So, you know, it's where we use zooms and the way we use dissolves, they sort of evolve throughout the story, and the way we use reflections evolve throughout the story. As all of those things are sort of bringing the two sides of the story closer together as the film goes on, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Wow. Well,
Did you shoot it in an apartment block? Was the apartment in an apartment? Was it in?
Yeah, no, so the house was in a real location, but the apartment we built on a set, and it's very hard. And shooting up 22nd floors is a nightmare if you're not on a, it's like a nightmare. But we used like huge LED screens for the outside. So that was playing as we were shooting. We shot the plates from a real location and then all that. And it really helped. But also I think that Jamie, the DP, can talk to it a lot better than I can. But having that outside, you could do something quite interesting with the focus. So it was sort of more in focus than you might imagine it would be than if you'd just been on location, because you could sharpen the screen so it was really sharp, and then it did something to our focus. So you could always sense that the world was out there outside the window. Where if you were shooting on a real location, it'd be very hard to get deep focus photography to work like that. So it was like stuff like that that really actually helped. It really, I was so glad that we chose to make that. So, because even that feels a bit otherworldly up in that apartment, and I didn't want it to feel too grounded in reality. And I think that helps it feel a bit like, wait, well, is this real? What's real and what's not real? So I think it helped.
It gives you way more control, doesn't it, over, you know, where you put your camera, the light, how it comes up and down, and like you can really fade in and out. It's fantastic.
Although I do get a bit bored when I'm on sets. That's the truth of it. On locations, I quite like the tension of it. Like the sun's going down. Fuck, what are we gonna do? Or like, there's no.
I don't like. We shot 16 days on a set, and I want to just shoot on locations.
I know it's you get a bit bored on set. It's too safe and like, I don't know. There's something strange about it.
There's maybe like too much control. I know that people love the control, and I think that's it's a great advantage, but I also feel that sometimes having too much control over too much is it's like it's sometimes nice to have restrictions that are the limitations of the location itself. Like the fact that we can just move walls and do things like that. I was like, that's a little bit too much freedom. I like being up against a wall, like you can't move it, it's too small a space. I kind of
When you've got like 3 choices, not 500 choices.
yeah, it's like
then,
too many choices. Like we could do this. It's like maybe I don't want that. I just want something simpler.
Yeah, it's true.
William, if you could talk a bit about your approach to the visuals of the film, I'd love to hear that as well. I have to say, watching the film, I was like, I found myself smiling a lot. I mean, I enjoyed it so much. I was luxuriating in your images, and maybe I'm depraved because I was, despite all the awfulness happening on screen, I was like grinning at just what you were creating there. Like when Thomasine is holding the gun up to Anne Hathaway, or when she comes in the fur coat. I mean, there's so many just gorgeous images that have a lot of obviously stylistic flair and humor, but and beauty. And the title credits, the lettering, I mean, everything you've created so seamlessly.
It's funny because hearing the others talk about listening to the film, I mean, I really have learned that. I learned it last time, I learned it this time even more, which is, I think it unnerves a lot of financiers and studios and producers if you sort of say, I've got to respond to what the film is telling me it needs, because they really totally freak out when you say things like that. They're like, that doesn't help us budget, or like that doesn't help us sort of like, you know, you are in the edit now and so on. And but I really felt like all of the elements we responded to what we were finding as we were going. So initially, Olga, who was the costume designer, and Craig, who was the production designer, Ari Wegner, I'd worked with before, and Beth, she was a cinematographer again here. The first conversation we had really was making sure we were all thinking the same thing. And actually what came out of those initial conversations was actually texture. So the first thing Olga presented, I had never worked with Olga before, but I really, really liked her. The first thing she presented me was a picture of loads of moldy fruit and moth-eaten clothes. And somehow it just felt absolutely right for the sort of the texture, the pattern of this world of Eileen's. Craig was the same. Craig was very much about making sure that we were shot, everything was on location. So we didn't have any sets. So when we found the hero house, the house where Eileen and Dad lived, we turned up and raccoons had gone in and just shit themselves stupid in that place, and died in there. And so you think, oh great, I'm going to make a movie in New York, and in fact you are making a movie in an abandoned, smashed up house full of dead raccoons in New Jersey, and it's quite a different experience. But it all lends itself to the, like very often, because of the size of the house, the camera had to sit outside of the house and shoot through a door or a window because it couldn't actually fit in the physical space. So, the actors were freezing. I mean, they were absolutely freezing. We shot it in January in New Jersey, and it added something to the scene for sure. These elemental things. But yes, we sort of set out in this way, and then you bring in elements. And Richard Reed Parry, who did the music, responded to the images that he saw. I mean, in order to get him on board, I just sent him the last 10 minutes, which was really all image, no dialogue, and just said, if you like this, then see what you think, and maybe you could come on. And he responded very well to it, because he thought, well, this is just 10 minutes of music, fantastic. I can just really, I think the idea I had in my head for what this thing might be did change, and I don't know whether the film that we ended up with is necessarily what I had first imagined, but I'm really happy with it. I'm really, really happy with what we found. But that is as a process, through a process of listening to other people and collaboration, and hearing their ideas and responding to them and so on. And then these, what you're saying, all these compromises that you may have, only 3 options rather than 50, then that makes the film, doesn't it? I mean, that's totally. I mean, I had some sort of ideas in my head about some images I'd seen and some ideas, and some of the blocking was found with the actors. We did have rehearsal, because I think for me the actors' movements needs to be driven by them. It has to be motivated by an idea that they have. So we went to the real locations, and what was great with Craig, for example, is he believes very much in creating the house, absolutely dressing the whole house, not just the bits you see. So Thomasin and Shay, as father and daughter, would go there the day before we were going to be on set and just sit in the house and move around it and start to imagine that they lived there a bit. And we got rid of the smell, thank God, at that point. I mean, it's really. And it was important because obviously the next day the air scrubbers came in, and all of the PPE and all of the COVID compliance officers and the whole testing unit and everything. So like the house didn't actually resemble a house at all the next day. It was the bit we were going to be shooting. So at least they'd had a day to imagine what this house could be like, and how they could have lived there, and how they might shout at each other up and down the stairs, or run around going to the bathroom, that sort of thing. And we read through some scenes, and just took the time to rehearse and sit there and so on. And that's how and we shot it in 2 blocks. So the first block was Eileen and Dad. We built up their world. That was 10 days before Christmas. Then we had a 2-week break. Well, not a break really. I mean, we actually then started shortlisting the second block over Christmas, and then the second block was with Thomasin and Annie. So we were able to introduce Rebecca into Eileen's life. So we, having built up that life, we then put in this catalytic influence, and then we shot those scenes after that. But that seemed to work quite well, But
Did you edit that first block over the 2 weeks before?
No, but the end of there, I every other day I went and sat with him and with Nick. Nick was the editor of Lady Macbeth too, so we had a relationship already. And I just need that reassurance to go in and sit with him and say, do we have this? Because God knows I don't know where my mind is on the day when we're shooting. I mean, I'm looking at the monitor, but I mean, yeah, it's like an out-of-body experience, frankly.
That's the hardest thing, isn't it? It's like you've got 20,000 million things in your head, and you're supposed to be concentrating on this thing that is happening in front of you, and you have to ignore everything else. It's really difficult. It's really difficult.
it's like people saying, you've got people saying, like, have we got it? Can we move on? You're like, I have absolutely no idea. Do you know, I think so.
I just say we do, and then later I'm like, I hope I was right.
That's what I do. I'm like, well, I don't want to do it anymore, so I don't know. Let's just move on. Let's move
No,
on.
I have to rephrase that, because I don't want actors to think that I don't know that we have the performance. I always felt like we had the performance. That was the one thing I feel very strongly about, that actually I was given a piece of good advice very early on, which is, when you say cut, if you're available to an actor, if an actor knows you're there, that they can look up and see you, that it actually is very important for them to know that you are watching what they're doing, rather than being like, why isn't the snow machine working, and being over there doing that. Do you know what I mean? Like, actually they're in the moment, and you're available to them. So I always felt confident we had the performance, and could feedback give the feedback on that. But I mean, it's just, I mean, the more elements you add, I mean, extras. I mean, this is the first time I ever worked with extras. I mean, supporting artists, background artists. I mean, it's like, it's just like, we show the bar scene. It's just absolutely full of people smoking cigarettes, and during COVID, that's like,
it's chaos.
It's absolutely, yeah. It's a bar. It's a full on, and then trying to make sure you've got the said relationship between two people amongst all of this stuff and so on. And it's really a thrill. I mean, it really is a thrill isn't it? I mean, I find it absolutely thrilling. But
thrill in retrospect.
I was just going to say, I have so much anxiety. I feel that there's definitely joy on set, and there's excitement, especially when it's there, especially the performance is there and the emotion is there. But I also just have so much anxiety about everything all of the time. And then I would go to bed and be thinking about the next day. And it was constant. So I think after you direct it, you're like, wow, that was great. But then in the moment, there was like a stone on my chest. I need to work on it. I think I'm much, I started out as a writer, so I was much more comfortable in that place. And directing became like, it's exposure therapy. Just keep doing the thing that gives me anxiety, and hopefully over time it will go away.
It's funny. Sorry, Andrew. Come on.
No, I was just going to say, the tough thing about being a director is I feel like what you've got to do is take on everybody's anxiety. Producers, actors, every team, every person on the crew, everybody. You have to take it all in and then not show any anxiety to anybody. So you take in everybody's like stress, and then you have to be quite calm and feel like you know exactly what's happening and everything's fine and it is amazing and this is great and everything's working. And then you just go home and then you cry into your pillow and scream at night, and then you refresh yourself and then you do the same thing the next day. And I think that's just what we have to do, because everybody's anxious. Actors are anxious, DPs are anxious, and you have to make them feel like they're not that their anxiety is fine. Oh, don't worry, I'm in control of it. You're all right.
Yes.
So
no, I was thinking of the Sidney Lumet book. I can't remember what it's called. The one where he's basically saying, lunchtime I have a little siesta, and then at the end of the shooting day, maybe I go home early, have dinner with my wife, and then maybe I might go see a play one evening. And then it's like, what it's like the sort of gentleman direct. Like this.
I was like, sir, we don't have the time for any of this. There's no time for this dilly-dallying. What are you speaking of?
Yeah,
this is capitalism we're making our films under. I don't understand.
So we have some questions from the audience I wanted to get to in our remaining time. The first one I'll just read. It's to any of you who would care to answer it, or all of you. It says, I've been fortunate to watch all 3 films in the theater, 2 of them with Q&As and 1 of them at a film festival. Could you please speak about the significance of the theatrical communal experience in this day and age, and whether it's baked into the DNA of cinema itself as it means to you?
I mean, look, I think it's essential. It's, I think all of us, when we make films, there's always a fear that it's not going to be theatrical and it's just going to end up being on a television, and no one's ever going to see it in the theater. And that's just, it's devastating that even that as a possibility. You want at least some people to get to see it in a theater, and it is that communal experience that you know, you're making something that is speaking to an audience. And I love the idea that there are strangers sitting in an audience having a collective response to a movie, laughing or crying, whatever it might be. It makes what you've done so much more powerful. I will say that the theatrical experience has to make sure that it's good, and that the screens are good, and the sound is good, and they're playing it at the right level. And there's all these things. And when you're on the tour going to lots of different cinemas, you're like, can you turn it up, please? It's too quiet. And that drives me crazy, because you've done something for the theatrical experience, and you want to make sure that theaters are doing it in the best, showing it in the best way that they possibly can.
Mm-hmm. I think it's also
so
good.
important. No, go ahead, Will.
Sorry, please go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh no, I think it's essential. I love watching movies in theaters. I think that there was this time, it was a little bit ago, I went to the Metrograph and I watched The Shining for the first time in a theater, as I'd only watched it on TV before, and so it just completely blew my mind. It was like, this movie is perfection. And there were people in the theater who'd never seen the movie before, and this was the first time they were watching it. They were terrified. They were like screaming. And I just realized, like, that's the communal experience. You can't get that at home. Yeah. You just can't. And I felt jealous that they were watching it for the first time in a theater, because it was such the projection was amazing. It was, the Metrograph is phenomenal. And I just want to see movies more in that way. Like that, Andrew, that's your movie is playing at the Music Box right now in Chicago. You know, that's just how I see films. I think I understand the accessibility of it, the issue, but I feel like you need to keep some part of that alive. Like we have to, because we're also making it for that format, you know. I think that's sometimes a forgotten element of it. This is, I definitely wanted this film to feel like it has scope, and, you know, it's not too small. Like, it really needs to be experienced on a bigger screen, even though the story itself is about these kids. Like, I feel like also the people who have responded respond to the movie, they love that they watched it in the theater, like from festivals and such, because our movie isn't out yet, but I'm glad that we get a theatrical release. We're very lucky to do that, because it's getting increasingly rare to get that.
I think it's also important to know whether it's theatrical or not as you're making it or before you're making it, because you would make it in a different way. I mean, certainly in the edit, when we were editing on a big TV, and then we would go and every now and again get a screening at Film 4 in the screening room, and the experience was totally different. I mean, really, like the amount of information that the eye can take in is different on that level. So I think I have to know what it is, where it's going to end up, because it will actually inform the way in which it's made, essentially. And also, I'm glad we made it for, like, we were thinking of a big screen when we made it, because the premiere was at the Eccles Theatre in Park City, which was, I mean, the biggest screen I've ever seen. I mean, it was absolutely massive. I mean, terrifyingly big. And so, you know, thankfully it held up, because we had that in mind when we were shooting it. But had we not, I mean, had we decided it's going to end up being seen on iPads everywhere, we may have gone a bit tighter on everything, a bit closer and so on. And then it would have been completely distorted experience, I think.
The next question, someone asks, a question we're often asked when pitching our project is, why now? How do you navigate that question, especially considering a film project usually takes several years from ideation to completion?
I mean, I hate that question. It's always asked, and I hate it.
I also hate this question, because the cynical answer is you just keep working on it until someone finally thinks it's the right time to make the movie. I mean, cynically, I think Hala was made because Trump had instituted a Muslim ban. Like that, I mean, I feel like there was an interest in the stories of Muslims, and that sounds like a terrible thing to say, but I do feel like the timing is not coincidental. And then with this film, I think part of it, you know, has to do with what's unfortunate is like the Black Lives Matter movement and understanding that the lives of Black people and the representation of those of their stories. But by the time it was made, it'd been many years already since it's going on. So it's almost like the timeless stories are like they can exist and be made at any point. But I felt because it takes so long to make a movie, I'm not thinking so much about what's happening now. I just try to keep going and eventually someone will say yes, I hope.
Whenever
also-
I hear that, also.
Sorry, go on, William.
I was just going to say, whenever I hear that question, I always think, did anyone ever ask David Lynch that question?
Yeah, right.
No.
Elephant Man now. Yeah.
Can you actually go
I would
to
say I
pitch
had
that
it in a dream. Like I had a dream yesterday.
Why this movie now? Why is this movie relevant to us now? It's like, it's sort of an irrelevant question in that sense. You know?
And also the film is forever. Like the film is going to be there for like the next however many hundreds of years. So it doesn't have to be for just now. It's like, and you want to say, well, because I think it's going to be a good film and it's an interesting story. I mean, that really should be why now. And then the film will live on and it might mean something different in 2 years, 10 years, 20 years, 100 years, whatever it might be. But, you know, it's just because they want to know. Basically what they really mean is it going to make money? That's what the question is. It's not like, is it going to make money now? Not, you know, why now?
So we have time for one more question, and sorry to the folks where we didn't get to all of the questions, but the last question actually is specifically for Andrew, and it is 45 years. One of my favorite films of the decade is also a ghost story of sorts. Can we perhaps look forward to one more film to complete the trilogy?
I mean, I am sort of obsessed by ghosts, but I do think I think actually everything I've done is also always about how the past haunts us and how we can't escape it. And sometimes that will take more of an obvious form in terms of like some actual ghost or a dead body in the past that is like speaking through the ice, or it's like just metaphorical. But yeah, I imagine that there will be another film at some point which will also have some element of ghosting, because I'm obsessed by it. As a kid, I love ghosts. I still kind of believe in them as well, and I still kind of think I'm constantly surrounded by them. So yeah, I think there'll be some more ghosts.
To do Jasper remake? You wouldn't do. No,
Is
Jasper.
Jasper or
Casper.
Is it
Oh, is it
Casper?
Casper? Jasper
I was like, what's Jasper?
Isn't it
Jasper the Friendly Ghost. Yeah, that's it.
Live
That's going to be
live action. Do you do live action Casper?
Actually, I do have one more question for the group, which is, we talked about this a little bit, I guess, mainly in relation to Eileen, but to all three of you, do you think of tone or genre when you're developing a project, or do those emerge naturally through the process of developing and making the film?
I mean, I find that increasingly I'm being pushed to consider genre as the sort of really is one of the first considerations for project by the people who are looking to finance the film. They need to know that it fits in a genre box quite successfully in order that it can be marketed and then there will be an audience for it. And I think, you know, any drama, any story that I'm interested in telling is always met with, but could you just sort of engineer a little bit to be a bit funnier or a bit scarier or a bit more, you know, and I think it's because these guys are finding it tough to sell movies, and, you know, without there being a big star and any awards and so on. Yeah, that's my experience. It's not I mean, genre is not bad necessarily, but I think it's bad if it's simply because it's coming from the wrong place. I think that's my feeling anyway.
Yeah, I think that's right. There's always, people do need the drama. Is so hard to sell drama. They just don't seem to. Nobody seems to want to make it, which it's really depressing because it just makes no sense. It's absolutely no sense. Can we not make just a drama nowadays? I just don't understand it. But tone for me
is
terrifying. It's so scary.
Yeah.
But tone is always the key. If you don't know the tone of what it is you want to make, then I think it's going to be a struggle. Like that's always what I go into thinking. I know what I want the film to feel like, which is essentially tone. And everything does come from that space for me. How do I want the film to feel more than anything else?
It emerges from the writing for me because it feels like there's the tone sort of starts to become the sandbox in which the world is, like what the world is. So there's certain things the characters can't do or say, or certain events that can't happen in part because of the tone. Like it's a departure, it would be a departure. So that I find it emerges in the writing process of, for me at least. And then I think it's less obvious to other people reading it sometimes, unless you start to show them like elements of it and like it feels like this. But when I'm writing it, it starts to crystallize, and it becomes, by the time I'm done with writing like a few drafts, I understand what it is. I think it's maybe harder when someone is just reading the script. Though I've read scripts where it like feels really clear to me, but then other folks read it and they're like, I was expecting a different movie from that But I feel like it comes together. And I do think the cynical way of looking at the genre question is like more or less like they're trying to imagine what the trailer looks like and what music to use, and that helps them find a way to like translate the story you told to like in a bite size to other people so they can go to the theaters and buy tickets. But I think that's what they're looking for, is how do you make a trailer for like a drama? Like, William, you say that the genre is not all bad. I think both of your films are so well made for trailers. They have amazing trailers. They're so thrilling to watch. You're like, oh my God, I gotta watch the movie. The Lady Macbeth trailer is phenomenal. So I think it's just them thinking about that, I guess, earlier in the process of how do they market it, which really shouldn't be your job, I think, as a filmmaker. I think the market is the last consideration. Maybe that's a bold statement to make in 2024.
Yeah. But do you feel also that you have to get that on the page? Because I increasingly feel like that people need to know, it needs to be in the writing. The genre needs to be in the writing. So if it's some action movie, it has to be wham bam in the writing. That sort
Yeah.
of.
They want more and more of that. Like for Hala, it's very spare. I was like, I know what it's supposed to be. But now I'm increasingly feeling like the prose has to feel more like the world of the movie, which has been a shift too from writing in television, because in television, the executives are reading it and it's very literal. And you're not the director, and like I've worked on shows where I'm not the director. So I've kind of gotten more used to trying to write something that is easier for other people to understand, but is a little bit more like, I already know this. So I'm writing this for an audience to read it.
Yes, and also for actors to sign on. And then maybe it's not maybe the script that you would want to shoot, you would pare it back. There would be a part you do before you shoot it, so that a lot of the stuff that's on the page you wouldn't necessarily need. Yeah, it's scripts have to do so many different things, don't they? That's the hardest
I think
thing.
sometimes too much, I think sometimes it's like we trust that I read some of Sofia Coppola's scripts and they're very spare and they tell you exactly what the movie is. But I could see from an outside perspective, it doesn't tell you enough. Like, but it's that like she knows what she's doing, so it's kind of like why does she need to write something?
These are the actual scripts. These are not the sort of transcriptions from the movies. These are not.
Those are just the scripts I've been reading are the ones that come out for your consideration scripts. Like I just read them and I'm sure they're edited. I don't feel like they're the ones
That's
that
what I mean. Sometimes I wonder sometimes whether it's just a transcription of the film that it's.
Oh
That you
no, I
don't.
think it is actually the script, like, but just cleaned up with all the omits and all the production changes made. But hers are very spare. Like I just read Priscilla.
Everyone knows what Sofia Coppola films are going to be like.
Yeah.
Because she so she doesn't need to put that in because everyone's like, oh yeah, we know what that's going to be. We know what it's going to be.
But also for her, why put something in it that she already knows how to film? I think that I've just learned that I'm doing it to make sure other people understand what I'm thinking.
So I don't want to abuse your time, and I'm getting signal to wrap it up, but I'm going to sneak in one more question, and this is actually for Minhal and Andrew. I noticed, or obviously I saw that both of your titles.
So nice to I'm joking.
Okay.
We're like, see, we get it. You're in Rome.
Yeah, you're in Rome.
You have the excuse.
No, I was struck by the fact that both of your titles have the what is it? First person plural. We grown now and all of us strangers. And I know how those titles work on me, but I'm curious if anything you'd want to share about how you came up with those titles and any intention you might have had in including we rather than, there's a scene in Minhal in your film where the father says, "You grown now" to his son. Lil Rel says that, but the title is We Grown Now. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but
No,
curious.
I think the title actually came out of wanting it to feel like a kid would say it. So I think that's where it came from. Like I thought about so many titles, but I'm a bit bad at them. Like it was called Untitled Cabrini Green Public Housing Project for like 5 years. So I was like, please help. I need help. But it came from that. And also there's this local rapper here in Chicago who actually grew up in Cabrini Green as well. And he had an album called We Grown Now. And he was one of the people I interviewed, and I said, it would be real, it sounds like something a kid would say. And I would like, it feels like the title of the movie because the kids are kind of like going through that stage of growing up.
Yeah, I guess I did it because I wanted it to feel like the film was a conversation with the audience, and that I wanted them to engage in it in terms of their lives and their own experience to bring it into the film in some way. So it felt like a more of a collective experience that the film was doing. Plus, if you start a film with A, you get on the top of the lists of everything.
Number one, strangers.
A11.
Too many films. It's like put an A, you're at the top of the list. It's
There you go.
perfect. Yeah.
Also, when you vote for a movie, like in voting, All of Us Strangers is up there, up top.
Tell me about
Well
it.
played,
Don't
Andrew.
even think about that.
You
It's
had
like
the
you've got
long game in mind.
William, Minhal, Andrew, thank you so much for spending some time with us today. Love this conversation. Thank you for your films. Congratulations on your many Spirit Award nominations. And yeah, thank you. With the show.
See you
Thank you
guys.
so much. All right,
Thanks
have a
very
good
Everyone
much.
for tuning in.
night.
Bye-bye.